Well, hello everyone! Today I'm going to be reading you a story from comicbooksplus.com, and it is called Fairy Tale Parade. Oh, so colorful. So the story I'm reading to you today is called The Golden Ball. I had never read this one, but it is a fairy tale, and fairy tales are not true stories. They're just make-believe. And the one thing I love about fairy tales is they usually have a good ending. So let's get at it. Once upon a time, a little boy named Jan was busily gathering wood in the forest. Nearby, his little dog Tubby played among the flowers, gaily chasing the butterflies that flittered there. Suddenly, Tubby let out such an excited bark that Jan dropped his armload of wood and ran toward the clumps of bushes from which he could see. Tubby's little tail was wagging violently, and when Jan pushed his way through the bushes, what do you suppose he found? There on the ground lay the most beautiful golden ball he had ever seen. It shone as if it held all the sunbeams in the sky, and when he stooped to pick it up, it shivered on the ground as if it were alive. But for some reason, he couldn't touch it. Each time he reached for it, it rolled just out of reach. Now, Jan knew that he should take the wood home to his mother, but the sight of the golden ball was so wonderful that he couldn't help following it. So he skipped along behind it, through the woods, and down into the deep vale where he had never been before. Suddenly, the golden ball rolled faster and faster right up to the door of an old hut. And there it stopped. Jan and Tubby stopped too, for they did not know whether they should knock on the door or not. And then, before they could make up their minds, the door suddenly swung open, and there stood an old woman, a very old woman with a tall hat on her head and a huge cloak enveloping her. "Come in, little boy, come in. I was expecting you." And she held open the door invitingly. Cautiously, Jan stepped inside, pulling Tubby after him. "How did you know we were coming?" he asked gingerly. The old woman laughed. "My golden ball never fails. Every week it lures nice fat little boys to my cottage." And she reached out one bony arm and pinched his cheek. "And then what happens?" quarreled Jan. "And then I eat them," shouted the old woman. And with that, she pulled off her tall hat and flung off the huge cloak and stood before him, a witch. Jan took one look at her, and snatching Tubby up in his arms, he darted for the door. But the witch was too fast for him. She reached out and caught him and hooked him up on the wall by the back of his coat. "Oh, please, Mrs. Witch, don't eat me. I'll do anything you want, if only you will let us go. Please, Mrs. Witch." And Jan wriggled and squirmed as he tried to get off the hook, but it held tight firmly. The old witch laughed and started pouring weird mixtures into a big pot on the fireplace. All at once she stopped. Jan shut his eyes, for he was sure this time had come. He clutched Tubby to him and waited, but the witch did not take him down. Instead, she looked at him and said, "Wait a minute. Anything I ask, eh? Maybe that will be the best after all." And she pulled him down from the hook and sat him on a table. "I will give you one chance to save yourself, little boy. One chance." "What is it, Mrs. Witch? Oh, what is it?" "Very well. Nearby in a cave lives a huge dragon who stole the mate to my golden ball." So there's two, I guess. "Without the ball, there are many magic things I cannot do. I will give you 24 hours to get the ball back from the dragon. If you succeed, I will give you your freedom. But if you fail, I will eat your little dog here, whom I shall keep until you return. Do you still want to try?" "Oh, yes, Mrs. Witch, yes," said Jan. He hopped down from the table and started for the door when he stopped. "What shall I use to protect myself?" he asked. The witch took a large, heavy sword down from the wall and also a shield to go with it and handed them to the little boy. "Here, you may use these." And she hung the shield over his arm and thrust the sword into his hand. "Now be off, and remember, I give you only 24 hours. If you do not return, I shall have your dog for my supper." And she pushed Jan out the door and slammed it after him. And so Jan started off to the cave of the dragon, but he had not gone very far before he found that the sword was more of a hindrance than a help. It was so very long that it kept getting in between his legs and tripping him up. So he was forced to leave it alongside the road. After walking many weary miles, he approached the cave. It stood in the side of the mountain, and directly in front of it was a deep cliff which fell many feet down the mountainside. "This must be it," Jan said to himself, but the dragon was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe he is not at home," thought Jan. "I'll take a look inside and see if I can find the golden ball." He leaned the shield against the rocks which lined the edge of the cliff, and then he tiptoed inside the cave. The golden ball was not in sight, and then just as he turned to leave, Jan saw two huge eyes shining at him from the darkness. The dragon! He ran as fast as he could to the door of the cave. The dragon's hot breath on his heels, and just as he ran outside, he tripped over a stone and fell flat. The dragon was so close behind him that it almost tripped and plunged over Jan, skidding across the pathway on its nose. Smack! It landed against the shield, and there it saw the reflection of a great monster, the like of which it had never seen before. Now, the dragon had never seen himself, so he did not know that this monster which confronted him was really himself, and he thought he had come face to face with another dragon. So he's scared by his own reflection. He backed up, snorting and breathing fire. Jan had, by this time, darted behind the rocks, and he peered out cautiously, watching the dragon. The dragon watched this monster in the shield, snorting and breathing fire, even as he was. And then he charged with all his might. He ran into the creature in the shield and knocked it head over heels down the steep cliff. And then, because he had been going so fast, he couldn't stop. The dragon kept on going over the cliff too. Down, down, he plunged into the deep canyon below, snorting and breathing fire as he fell. Jan watched him fall and then sat down with a sigh of relief. Finally, when he had rested, he went into the dragon's cave to find the ball. It did not take him long to locate it, and soon he was on his way back to the witch's cottage. Tripping gaily down the road, tossing the ball into the air and catching it. When he knocked on the door of the cottage and the witch saw who it was, she was indeed surprised, for she had long given up the thought of having her ball back again. She held out her hand to take the golden ball from him, and just as Jan started to give it to her, he saw that in the other hand, which she held behind her back, the old witch held Tubby. Then Jan realized that the witch had no intention of keeping her promise and letting them go. She would get her golden ball back, and then she would eat the two of them anyway. Jan backed up, holding the ball in his hand. "Give me the ball!" roared the witch, and reached again for Jan. Suddenly, Jan backed up and tossed the ball into the air. "Catch!" she said, and instinctively the witch dropped Tubby and threw up both her hands to catch the ball. But it sailed over her head. She ran backward to try and catch it, and as she did, she bumped into the pot boiling on the fireplace. As she hit it, it tipped and she fell right into the pot with a yelp. At the same instant, the golden ball landed on the floor and splintered into 1,000 fragments. As it broke, there was a great explosion, and witch, cottage, and pot disappeared into the air. Jan found himself sitting on the ground with Tubby nearby, and there was not a sign of anything left to tell of his experience. When he had caught his breath, he looked about to see if he could find a fragment of the golden ball so that he might prove his story to his mother. Suddenly, in a patch of flowers, he saw something golden shining. He reached down to pick it up, and there in his hands he saw he had plucked a mass of golden flowers, each as bright as a sunbeam. "Just flowers," he said disappointingly, and dropped them at his feet. Then he and Tubby wearily started home, but Jan didn't know that where the splinters of the golden ball had fallen had sprung this mass of bright golden flowers. And to this day, they are called sunflowers because each one is as bright as a sunbeam. Well, that was a nice story, and it kind of gives you a little story about how sunflowers came to be. A make-believe one, but still, it's fun to hear stories, especially ones that have good endings. Well, I'll see you next time. Bye.